The first thing I saw when my eyes fluttered open was the ornate plaster ceiling rose of my old bedroom, a detail I hadn't laid eyes on in decades. Sunlight, too bright and too young, streamed through the windows. And then her face swam into view, a mask of practiced concern that made my stomach lurch. Clara, my cousin. The architect of my misery in another life. Before I could even process the impossible reality of my own youth, the familiar syrupy tone began. Alara? Oh, you're awake. Thank goodness. She clutched my hand, her grip too tight. I've had the most terrible revelation. I simply cannot do it. I cannot marry that doomed soldier, Alistair Vance. The name hit me like a physical blow. Alistair. Visions of a life not lived flashed before me. A handsome, uniformed man with a solemn smile, a future stolen before it began. In this life, the engagement had been between Clara and Alistair, our arrangement between our capitalist family and his powerful military one. But I knew the truth. In the life I'd just left, it had been mine, and she had taken it from me. She was still talking, her voice a theatrical whisper. My heart, it turns out, belongs to Julian Croft. He's just returned from the countryside and he's so modern, so ambitious. Alistair is just a soldier and a wounded one at that. A golden future? It's fool's gold. I release him. You can have him. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless. Memories, sharp and corrosive, flooded the space between my heartbeats. My previous life. A different marriage. To Julian Croft. The smooth-talking, unreliable returnee who had charmed my family and bored me into a numb submission. I had built his empire from the shadows, my business acumen and relentless work ethic forging him into the richest man in the country. And my reward? A cold mansion, a colder marriage bed, and 4 children who called me mother but shared none of my blood, each one a product of his countless infidelities. I had died the admired wife of a tycoon, and the most hollow woman on earth. And Clara? She had gotten her wish in that last life. She had taken Alistair from me. And it had destroyed her. The decorated officer had been horrifically injured on a mission. Paralyzed, his face shattered, his spirit twisted into something bitter and violent. She, a girl who had never so much as made her own tea, became a nursemaid and a stepmother to 2 children he'd adopted from a fallen comrade. He died young, leaving her a destitute widow in her 20s, destined to remarry a cobbler and live a life of poverty and abuse. She had been reborn. He had to have been. That was the only explanation for this sudden, frantic switch. She remembered the misery that awaited her as Mrs. Vance and the glittering false public image I had projected as Mrs. Croft. She thought she was discarding a broken man and seizing a fortune for herself. She had no idea that the fortune had only existed because of me. And she had absolutely no idea that I too was now awake. A glacial calm settled over me. The panic, the disorientation, it all froze into a single sharp point of purpose. She was handing me my future back on a silver platter, believing it was a punishment. I would take it. I let my eyes go wide, feigning a vulnerability I hadn't truly felt since I was this age. Oh, Clara, are you certain? The Vances are such a prestigious family. Prestige is a cage if the lock is broken, she said, parroting a line I was sure she'd heard from Julian. I want a real life. A life of passion. You understand, don't you? You've always been so, practical. Practical. The word they always used for me when they meant unfeeling. I let a slow, understanding smile touch my lips. It was the first mask of this new life and it fit perfectly. Of course I understand, I said, my voice soft, mature, unbothered. Love is the most important thing. The lie was so smooth it felt like truth. I sat up and swung my legs out of bed, my body feeling lithe and strong in a way it hadn't in 40 years. If your heart is with Julian, then you should be with him. I will do my duty to the family. I will fulfill the alliance with the Vances. I walked to her and placed a comforting hand on her arm. She preened under what she thought was my admiration for her bravery. I then turned and linked my arm through my Aunt Beatrice's, Clara's mother, who had been hovering by the door. I made it seem as if she were my own mother, not Clara's. So what if Clara ends up with the empty title of Mrs. Officer? I said lightly, for Aunt Beatrice's benefit. It's just a name. Nothing to fuss about. Aunt Beatrice beamed with pride, immediately turning to shower Clara with compliments for her selfless decision. I just smiled watching them. Clara's eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of confusion in them, quickly masked by smug satisfaction. She thought she had won. She thought she had condemned me to a life of hardship while she sailed off to a life of luxury. She had no idea she had just signed her own death warrant and handed me the keys to my kingdom. The telegram arrived that afternoon just as it had in the last life. Alistair Vance had been severely injured during a mission. He was bedridden. The doctors feared permanent disability. The family gathering was immediate. My grandfather, the only one who had ever truly loved me, was too ill to leave his room. My father, a man who saw children as assets and daughters as depreciating ones, looked at me with cold calculation. "The engagement was arranged by your grandfather and old man Vance," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "If you don't want to go through with it, you don't have to. It was a test." Why? The Vance family's influence was immense. To snub them now would be a catastrophic insult. My father, who favored my younger brother Neil, would have loved nothing more than to see me fail and humiliate the family, giving him an excuse to further sideline me. My mother, who followed my father's lead in all things, merely nodded along, her eyes already calculating the social fallout. I was alone. I had always been alone. But this time I had knowledge. "Don't be ridiculous, father," I said, my voice clear and firm, echoing in the opulent drawing room. "A promise is a promise. The Vances are our allies. In times of difficulty we show our strength and our loyalty, not our cowardice. I will go to him." The shock on their faces was a tiny, satisfying victory. They had expected tears, resistance, a messy scene. They got resolve. Clara, standing in the doorway, couldn't hide her triumphant smirk. She thought I was walking blindly into my own destruction. I went to my room and began to pack. Not with the frivolity of my youth, but with the precision of the surgeon and director I had been. Simple, practical clothes, my medical texts, and my most prized possession, the ancient lacquered box containing my great-grandfather's set of silver acupuncture needles. This was not a social visit. This was a mission. Only as I was preparing to leave did I learn that Clara would be accompanying me. Julian Croft had been assigned to a village near where Alistair was convalescing. Of course. She couldn't let me out of her sight. She had to be there to witness my downfall and to secure her own prize. She arrived with a mountain of luggage, suitcases filled with dresses, skirts, and delicate leather shoes. She played the part of the delicate city girl to perfection, bossing the staff around and then turning to me with a simpering smile. "Alara, darling, you're so much stronger than me. You won't mind carrying this one for me, will you?" I looked at the massive case, then back at her. "My own belongings are quite heavy with medical texts," I said coldly. "I can't carry yours too." Aunt Beatrice shot me a venomous glare but immediately turned and eagerly helped Clara load all her luggage onto the truck herself. She pulled me aside, her grip tight on my arm. "You look after her down there, you hear me?" she hissed. "She's delicate. You're sturdy. Make sure she's comfortable." I pretended not to hear her and simply handed Clara my own, much smaller medical case. "If you wouldn't mind," I said sweetly, "since you're traveling so light." The look of sheer outrage on her face was worth every second of the long, dusty journey that was to come. The train ride was a study in contrast. Clara spent it complaining about the dust, the noise, the quality of the food, and the common people sharing our compartment. She preened and posed, waiting for the admiration she was so accustomed to in the city. The farmers and laborers simply looked through her, their gazes weary and uninterested in her performance. I spent the journey watching the countryside roll by, my mind rehearsing surgical procedures and meridian charts, my fingers tracing the patterns on my acupuncture case. We arrived at the provincial station, a dusty, wind-swept platform that seemed a world away from the capital's gleaming terminals. As we disembarked, a young soldier in a crisp uniform snapped to attention, his eyes scanning the passengers before landing on me with a startling certainty. He marched over and gave a sharp salute. "Miss Sterling? I'm Private Evans, sent by Colonel Vance to escort you." The use of my surname and the respect in his tone sent a jolt through me. In my previous life I'd been met with confusion and pity. This was different. I smiled. "Thank you, Private. Lead the way." From behind me I heard Clara's muttered whisper. "She's about to be a young widow and she's still smiling. Let's see how long that lasts when that doomed officer croaks." I ignored her, but my smile tightened. Private Evans's jaw clenched slightly, telling me he'd heard her too. His politeness towards her was glacial as he loaded my single suitcase into the back of the waiting Beijing 212 Jeep. Clara's mountain of luggage required a separate truck, a fact that sent her into a fresh wave of indignant fury. Her face darkened completely when she realized the final leg of the journey involved bouncing along a deeply rutted dirt track in the back of an open-top tractor. The Jeep was for me alone. "This is outrageous," she sputtered, her face flushing an ugly red. "You," she pointed at Private Evans. "You will take me to Pengju village first. Then you can come back for her." Private Evans didn't even blink. "My orders are to escort Miss Sterling directly to Colonel Vance's location, ma'am." The ma'am was a dismissal. Without another glance, he held the door of the Jeep open for me. As we drove away, I looked back to see Clara standing amidst her pile of designer luggage, fists clenched, looking smaller and more foolish than I had ever seen her. A tiny, fierce spark of joy ignited in my chest. The military infirmary was a low, whitewashed building on the edge of a vast training ground. The air smelled of antiseptic, dust, and something else, the faint, sweet smell of infection and despair. Before we even reached the door, I could hear it. A low, agonized groaning, the sound of a man trying and failing to contain unbearable pain. It was a sound I knew intimately from my years in hospitals. It was the sound of a body breaking. Private Evans's face was grim. "The Colonel, he has good days and bad days, miss. Today is a bad day." We stepped inside. The light was dim, the air stiflingly hot. And there he was. In the center of the room, lying on a simple cot, was a figure that looked less like a man and more like a mummy. Alistair Vance was completely swathed in bandages, from the crown of his head down to his thighs. Only a slit was left for his mouth and nose and another for his eyes. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had known it would be bad, but the reality was a physical blow. The chief doctor, a harried-looking man with a receding hairline, was just injecting a clear liquid into Alistair's foreline. "There," the doctor said, his voice tired. "That's the last of the Synodine. It's the best imported painkiller we have. It should give him a few hours of peace." Synodine. The name was a trigger. In my past life, I'd pioneered research on its long-term effects. It was a sledgehammer. It blunted pain but destroyed nerve function and ravaged the liver. It was a drug of last resort, not a regular treatment. "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through the hushed room. The doctor turned, startled and then annoyed by the interruption. "Who are you? What are the contraindications for Synodine?" I asked, stepping forward, my medical director's persona snapping into place. "What is his liver function? His kidney output? You're giving him a drug that will destroy any chance of neural regeneration. His body is already fighting for its life. This will kill what's left of his nervous system." The doctor's face flushed with anger. "And what would a young girl like you know about advanced pharmacology? Synodine is a miracle drug. Other places don't even have access to it yet. If he keeps taking it," I said, my voice low and deadly serious, "there's no point in treating him. He might as well start preparing for the afterlife." The room went silent. The other medical staff stared at me aghast. The doctor sputtered, enraged. "How dare you? Who are you two?" A sound stopped him. A rasp, a scrape of air from the bed. The bandaged head had turned slightly towards us. A hand, trembling violently, encased in gauze, lifted a few inches from the mattress. The voice that emerged was a shredded, broken thing, but the command in it was unmistakable. "Enough." The doctor fell silent immediately. The slit of eyes found me in the dim light. There was a long, painful silence. Then the rasp came again. "Are you Alara?" The sound of my name on his ruined voice here now was profoundly shocking. We had never met. "Yes," I said, moving closer to the bed. "How did you know?" A faint huffing sound that might have been an attempt at a laugh. "My grandfather described you. Said you had eyes that didn't miss a thing." He paused, gathering strength for each word. "You shouldn't have come. The engagement is void. You should remarry." Even wrapped in agony and facing a life of disability, his first thought was to release me from my obligation. The decency of it, so starkly opposed to Julian's selfishness, left me breathless for a moment. I leaned closer so only he could hear me. "Let's not talk about that yet. Colonel Vance, I can help you. I can ease your pain. But you have to trust me. And you have to tell them to stop the Synodine. The phoenix-shaped eyes behind the bandages studied me. I saw the agony in them, the defeat, but also a flicker of the iron will that had made him a decorated officer. Nothing else works, he rasped. Highway will, I said with a certainty I felt in my bones. I opened my lacquered box, the silver needles gleaming under the electric light. The doctor gasped. Acupuncture? This is a modern military infirmary. This is superstitious nonsense. I won't allow it. Alistair's bandaged hand lifted again, a clear command for silence. His eyes were fixed on me. Do it. The trust in that single shredded word almost undid me. I turned to the gawking medical staff. I need everyone to leave. I require absolute focus for this procedure. Once the room was cleared, I approached the bed. Colonel Vance, this will hurt. A lot. The needles will stimulate nerves that have been shocked into silence. You must try to relax through the pain. I began. The first needle into a point on his scalp to regulate the flow of qi. He tensed, a sharp hiss escaping his lips. The second near his temple. The third, fourth, fifth. I worked with a speed and precision born of a lifetime of practice. I wasn't the young Alara Sterling anymore. I was Dr. Sterling, director of Metropolitan Hospital, and I was fighting for my patient's life. Sweat poured down my back as I inserted well over 100 needles, finding points through the bandages with an unerring knowledge of anatomy. He cried out small choked gasps that were worse than screams. His body trembled violently, his fists clenching the sheets. I saw the muscles in his jaw stand out like iron bands. I didn't allow myself to feel his pain. I was a conduit, an instrument of healing. My world narrowed to the point of my needle and the meridian map in my mind. I didn't notice the way his eyes, once dull with agony, were now fixed on me with an intensity that was more than just pain. I was so focused I didn't see the dawning awareness in his gaze. After nearly 300 insertions, I finally stepped back. His forehead was slick with sweat. The groaning had stopped. The room was silent except for our ragged breathing. For the first time since his injury, the relentless, stabbing agony had been replaced by a deep, throbbing but manageable ache. The relief was so profound it brought tears to his eyes. After 30 minutes, I began the careful process of removal. As the last needle came out, he let out a long, shuddering sigh. The door burst open and the doctor rushed in, ready to pronounce a disaster. He stopped short. Alistair Vance was still swathed in bandages, but he was smiling. A faint, exhausted but undeniable smile. His eyes found mine. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he looked at Private Evans, who was hovering anxiously by the door. "Evans. Sir. Escort Miss Sterling to my quarters. She is to want for nothing." The doctor was staring, his mouth agape. The man he had been pumping full of experimental drugs and writing off was now giving clear, coherent orders. I followed Private Evans out, my legs shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. I had done it. The first battle was won. The assigned house was a simple but clean bungalow. The news of my arrival and my identity as the colonel's fiancé had spread among the other military wives. As I walked, I felt their stares, heard their whispers. They were mostly from local villages, and a girl from the capital was an object of intense curiosity and suspicion. I ignored them, my head held high. I was no longer the girl to be pitied or gossiped about. I was the doctor who had just silenced the mummy's screams. And I was just getting started. The bungalow was Spartan but clean. A simple bed, a wooden table, 2 chairs. It smelled of soap and sun-baked earth. Private Evans deposited my suitcase just inside the door, saluted again, his young face a mixture of awe and confusion, and left me alone. The silence was immense. I sat on the edge of the bed, the adrenaline that had fueled me in the infirmary finally receding, leaving a hollow, trembling exhaustion in its wake. I had done it. I had faced the ruin of the man I was supposed to have married, and I had begun to put him back together. The reality of it, the sheer audacity of what I was attempting, crashed down on me. I was playing a dangerous game with fate, with my family, with a powerful military dynasty, and with a man I barely knew. But the memory of his voice, rasping out my name with a trust one had done nothing to earn, steadied me. It was so different from Julian's honeyed, empty flattery. This was raw, real, and it anchored me to this new, impossible present. I spent the next days in a rhythm that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. Mornings I would go to the infirmary. The director, Dr. Evans, no relation to the private, he'd informed me tersely, was initially hostile, his professional pride deeply wounded. But he was a doctor first, and the evidence was undeniable. Alistair's vital signs improved. The groaning stopped. The deathly pallor began to recede. I worked on him for hours each day, my needles charting a map of recovery across his broken body. The bandages came off, piece by painful piece, revealing the brutal extent of the damage. Shattered bones, livid scars, muscles withered from disuse. It was a landscape of pain, but I navigated it with a steady hand. I was no longer a visitor. I was his physician. And through it all he watched me. Those phoenix eyes, now free of their gauze cage, followed my every move. He rarely spoke during the sessions, conserving his strength, but his gaze was unervingly intense. It was analytical, curious, and held a warmth that I hadn't seen in any man's eyes for a very long time. One afternoon, about a week into my treatments, he broke his silence. His voice was stronger, though still rough. "Ilara." I was carefully inserting a needle near his shoulder. These techniques, they're not from any medical text I've seen. I didn't look up, focusing on the precise angle of insertion. My great-grandfather was a renowned physician in the old style. I've adapted some of his methods. It was a thin cover story for knowledge gained over a lifetime of practice, but it would have to do. "They work," he stated simply. Then after a pause, "The pain is different. It's not gone, but it's manageable. It's a pain that feels like healing, not like dying." I finally met his gaze. The honesty in his words was disarming. "That's exactly what it is." He held my look for a long moment. "You could have stayed in the capital. You could have taken the out I gave you. Why did you come?" The question hung in the air between us. I could have given him a dozen politic answers. Duty, family alliance, loyalty. But the raw trust he'd shown me demanded honesty. "Because I knew I could help," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And because I made a promise." Something shifted in his expression. The analytical coolness melted away, replaced by a look of profound gratitude that was almost too much to bear. He looked away, clearing his throat awkwardly. That small, shared moment broke down the last of the formal barriers between us. He started calling me by my name. Then a few days later it became Ilara, with a questioning lilt as if checking I was still there. Then it morphed into L, a shorthand that felt strangely intimate. The nurses and orderlies began to smile when they saw me, their suspicion turning to respect. I was no longer the strange city girl. I was the colonel's doctor, the one who had brought him back from the edge. Dr. Evans, despite himself, became my most ardent supporter. He watched my techniques, asked thoughtful questions, and began implementing some of the basic pain management principles I suggested. The day he respectfully asked if I would consider joining the hospital staff, even offering me the position of assistant director, I had to hide a smile. In my previous life I had run the largest hospital in the capital. But here now it was a victory. I accepted. It gave me access to resources, to a platform. And I used it. I started writing down the advanced medical theories I remembered. Aseptic techniques, triage protocols, pharmacological advances that were still years away. I proposed a series of training sessions for the staff. The first session was on basic field trauma care. I stood in front of a room of skeptical doctors and nurses, my heart pounding, channeling the authority of the director I had been. I spoke clearly, confidently, demonstrating techniques that were revolutionary to them. By the end, the skepticism had turned to rapt attention. Dr. Evans was beaming. After a few more highly successful sessions, he called me into his office. "Miss Sterling, Ilara, what you're doing here, it's changing things. It's saving lives that would have been lost. The staff looks up to you. I'm promoting you. Effective immediately, you are the head of clinical training." It was a title he'd invented on the spot. My domain was the entire medical staff, and my primary patient was Alistair Vance. The power of it, however small, felt intoxicating. It was my first real foothold in this new life, earned not by my name but by my skill. I went to Alistair's room that evening, a lightness in my step I hadn't felt in years. He was propped up in bed, reading a military report. The transformation was remarkable. Color was back in his face and the definition was returning to his arms. He was still a long way from the powerful officer he had been, but he was no longer the mummy. "You're late," he said, not looking up from his papers. There was a teasing note in his voice. I was busy, I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice. Being promoted. He looked up then, a genuine smile spreading across his face. It transformed him, carving dimples in his cheeks and crinkling the corners of his eyes. He was, I realized with a jolt, devastatingly handsome. I heard. Head of clinical training. I'm not surprised. He put the report down. Come here. I walked over to his bedside. He reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and calloused. The contact sent a shock through my system. Julian had never held my hand like this. It was always a possessive grip on my arm, a claim, not a connection. You're amazing, Elle, he said, his voice low and serious. The pride and affection in his eyes were unmistakable. Truly. I stood there, my hand in his, utterly speechless. In my previous life, I had built an empire for a man who had never once praised me. He'd criticized my coldness, my ambition, my lack of warmth. And here was Alistair Vance, a man who had every reason to be consumed by his own suffering, looking at me as if I had hung the moon. Tears, stupid and unexpected, pricked at my eyes. I blinked them away rapidly. He saw it. His smile softened. Hey, none of that. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze before letting go, breaking the moment with a tactful clearing of his throat. Now, doctor, what's the prognosis? When do I get out of this bed and start being a nuisance again? I laughed, the emotion of the moment dissipating. Patience, Colonel. You're healing remarkably fast. Another few weeks of aggressive therapy and you'll be driving Dr. Evans to distraction. Weeks? He grumbled, but he was still smiling at me. I have a proposition for you. Oh. Once I'm discharged. Once I'm me again. He gestured to his still weakened body. We should make it official. My breath caught. Official. The marriage, he said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. My grandfather's old. His last wish is to see me settled. Happy. So once I recover, let's get married. The bluntness of it, the lack of romantic pretense was so like him. It was a practical proposition from a practical man. But the hope in his eyes was anything but practical. You'd still be willing to marry me? Like this? He asked, the confidence faltering for a second, revealing a vulnerability that twisted my heart. I thought of Clara's smug face. I thought of Julian's oily promises. I thought of a lifetime of being alone in a crowded room. And I looked at this man who saw my value and trusted me with his broken body. Yes, I said, and the word felt like a vow. I would. The joy that lit up his face was brighter than the sun outside. It was in that moment, seeing his unguarded happiness, that I knew I wasn't just rebuilding his life. I was building my own. And for the first time in either of my lives, the foundation felt solid. The weeks that followed were a blur of focused intensity. My days were divided between the growing demands of my new role at the infirmary and the meticulous work of rebuilding Alistair Vance. The training sessions were a roaring success. I was no longer just teaching. I was leading, shaping the standard of care for the entire region. Dr. Evans looked at me with something akin to reverence, constantly marveling at the modern techniques I seemed to pull from thin air. And Alistair was thriving. The acupuncture sessions continued, but they became less about managing agony and more about restoring function. We graduated from needles to physical therapy. I would guide his atrophied limbs through exercises, my hands on his bare skin, feeling the hard-won strength slowly returning to his muscles. The professional distance I tried to maintain became increasingly difficult. The air between us during those sessions crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with a different kind of energy. He never let me forget his proposition. He brought it up constantly, each time with a new layer of sincerity layered over his inherent practicality. Elle, he'd say, gritting his teeth through a particularly grueling set of leg lifts, once we're married, I'll have to find a way to repay you for this torture. Perhaps a foot rub. Focus on your form, Colonel, I'd retort, my voice stern but my cheeks warm. Or, he'd continue undeterred, we could submit the marriage application now. Get the paperwork rolling. I'm told bureaucracy moves slower than I do on a bad day. His recovery was nothing short of miraculous. In less than a month he was walking, first with a cane then without. The sharp, defined features were no longer gaunt with pain, but filled out with health and a quiet authority that returned with his strength. The ice-faced king of hell, as his subordinates had once called him, was gone. In his place was a man who smiled easily, whose eyes crinkled at the corners, and whose gaze followed me with a possessiveness that made my heart stutter. The day he was officially discharged from the infirmary, he didn't ask. He told me. "We're going to the registration office," he said, taking my hand. His grip was firm, sure, no trace of a tremor. "Today." "Alistair, are you sure you're—" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. The look in his eyes was deadly serious. "Unless you've changed your mind?" I looked at our joined hands. His large and capable, mine slender but strong. I thought of the lonely, gilded path of my previous life. I thought of the empty title of Mrs. Croft. This was different. This was a partnership forged in fire and trust. "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "I haven't changed my mind." The marriage registration office was a small, utilitarian room with a tired-looking clerk. Alistair filled out the forms with a soldier's efficiency, his handwriting bold and decisive. When it came time for me to sign, my hand hovered for a second. This was it. The point of no return. I wasn't just a Lara Sterling, reborn seeker of revenge. I was about to become a Lara Vance. I felt his eyes on me, watching, waiting. I signed my name. He let out a breath I didn't realize he'd been holding. A brilliant, boyish smile broke across his face. As the clerk stamped the papers with a definitive thud, Alistair took the opportunity to wrap his arm around my waist, pulling me close. His large, warm hand settled on my hip, the touch shockingly intimate and possessive. I jumped slightly, a shiver running through me. He felt it. Of course he did. His smile turned into a knowing grin. "Nervous, Mrs. Vance?" My face flushed scarlet. He leaned down, his voice a low whisper meant only for me. "If my body weren't still in recovery, I would never let myself ruin your happiness by rushing this." The implication, the raw promise in his words left me breathless. Living 2 lifetimes, this was the first time a man's touch had felt not like a claim or a duty, but like a promise of pleasure. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with a kind face, pretended to be very interested in her stamp. A fellow officer who had accompanied us as a witness chuckled. "Easy there, Vance. The paperwork's dry, but you're not at full strength yet. Give the lady a break." Alistair just pulled me tighter against him, beaming with pride. He launched into a bragging monologue right there in the office, telling them how I'd dragged him back from death's door, how I'd been promoted, how my lectures were gaining attention all the way to the Capitol. The 2 officers laughed. "We've never seen him talk this much," one said. "Used to be the ice-faced king of hell. Congratulations. You've clearly thawed him out." They handed us the marriage certificate. It was a simple piece of paper, but it felt heavier than any contract I'd ever signed. It was my armor, my shield, my declaration of war against the past. With the paperwork done, we finalized his discharge. As we left the clinic hand in hand, stepping out into the bright sunlight, one of his subordinates reminded us to be careful on the steps. And that's when we saw her. A crazed figure, filthy and emaciated, her clothes hanging in rags, came rushing toward us. Her face was hollow, covered in angry red rashes. She looked like a wild animal. Alistair instinctively moved, shoving me behind him in a protective gesture that was both shocking and deeply reassuring. "Who are you?" he barked, his voice back to its commanding officer's tone. The figure skidded to a halt, bursting into ragged sobs. "It's me. Clara." I peered around Alistair's broad shoulder. It was her, but barely. The pampered, pristine girl from the Capitol was gone. This was a creature of dirt and desperation. He poured out a garbled story. She'd gone to Pengju village to find Julian. But he had already taken up with the village chief's daughter, smitten and ignoring her completely. The local women, strong and unwelcoming, had banded together to ostracize her, making her life miserable. In a desperate, stupid attempt to win him back, she had tried to bribe some local thugs to ruin the chief's daughter. The thugs, however, had chickened out, turned on her, and instead locked her in a cattle pen, where she was repeatedly assaulted for days before she managed to escape. She was a pitiable sight. But my sympathy was a cold, dead thing. She had made her bed in a cesspit, and now she had to lie in it. Alistair, ever the decent man, was furious on her behalf. "We'll get justice for this," he vowed, his sense of honor inflamed. Clara's eyes welled with tears of gratitude. Seeing his strength, his recovered handsomeness, A new calculation flickered in her desperate gaze. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Please, can I come back with you? I have nowhere to go. This was too much. I gently tugged on Alistair's hand, pitching my voice to sound sweet and concerned. Darling, we just got married. Bringing someone else into our home right now, it doesn't feel right, does it? He looked from my pleading face to Clara's filthy, wretched form. His protective instincts towards me instantly overrode his charitable ones towards her. Of course. You're right. He turned to Private Evans. Take her to the guest house. Get her cleaned up and fed. Clara's face fell. She stank and all her fine dresses and ration coupons had been stolen. She had no choice but to accept. But as Evans led her away, she turned back, her eyes narrowing at me with a fresh wave of hatred. Later, thick-skinned as ever, she sought us out and had the gall to ask me for money and shopping coupons. No, I said flatly. You brought a truckload of supplies. I barely have enough for myself. Always the gentleman, Alistair took out his wallet and handed her a few bills. Her eyes lit up not just at the money but at his generosity. She stared at him like a lovesick puppy, a look I knew all too well. Alistair, you're feeling better now? She asked tentatively, probably remembering the volatile man he became after his injury in our past life. One of the soldiers snapped, That's Colonel Vance to you. She flinched. I'm sorry, Colonel Vance. I can't take your money. Her false refusal was a transparent play for more sympathy. It worked on him. He pushed the bills into her hand. Take it. I stayed silent. He turned to me, worried I was upset. Elle? Are you all right? I gave him a serene smile. You forget. You're alive because of me. Do you think I wouldn't know if there was something wrong with me? He laughed, a rich, warm sound, and didn't let go of my hand for a second. Clara watched our joined hands, a bitter, confused jealousy twisting her features. She couldn't comprehend how her plan had gone so catastrophically wrong. Under her venomous gaze, Alistair led me to the waiting jeep and we drove away, leaving her in the dust of her own disastrous choices. It was the most satisfying feeling I had ever known. The military housing complex was a world unto itself, a small, orderly village of whitewashed bungalows nestled within the vast training grounds. As Alistair's jeep pulled up to ours, a small group of women emerged from neighboring homes, their faces curious but not unkind. They carried simple gifts: a basket of eggs, a pot of stew, a few clumsily made but heartfelt pastries. Heard the news, Colonel? One of them, a sturdy woman with a warm smile, said. Welcome home. And congratulations to you both. Alistair's arm was around my waist, a permanent fixture it seemed. He beamed, the Ice King truly melted. Thank you, Mrs. Gable. This is my wife, Ilara. Wife. The word, spoken aloud in this context, sent another thrill through me. It felt real here, surrounded by these practical, kind-faced women who saw us not as a political alliance, but as a newly married couple. They smiled at me, their eyes holding a new respect. I was no longer just the strange doctor from the capital. I was the colonel's wife, the one who had healed him. We accepted their gifts with gratitude and they left us with well wishes and knowing smiles. The moment the door closed behind us, Alistair let out a long, contented sigh. He looked around the spotless, simply furnished living room, then back at me. This place really feels different with a woman in it, he said, his voice a low rumble. So clean. Cozy. He pulled me into his arms as we sank onto the simple couch. It feels like a home. Then he leaned down and kissed me. It wasn't the chaste, hesitant kiss from the registration office. This was deep, claiming, and full of a promise that had been building for weeks. When he finally pulled away, we were both breathless. I don't do chores, I teased, my voice a little unsteady. I hired one of the local girls to clean it. There's still time to back out if you regret marrying such a lazy capitalist daughter. He paused for a second, then a low chuckle escaped him. You, lazy? You're a capitalist's daughter who stayed in a hospital, fetched water, fed me, and washed me when I couldn't do it myself. You've already gone above and beyond. The admiration in his eyes was genuine, and it warmed me from the inside out. Feeling a surge of boldness, I leaned in and kissed him again. One kiss led to another and then another, until we were tumbling onto the bed in the adjacent room, a tangle of eager hands and frantic breaths. He was surprisingly strong, his recovery lending a fierce urgency to his touch. He wouldn't let me sleep the entire night, his passion a stark, wonderful contrast to Julian's cold, perfunctory attentions. I couldn't believe that a man who had been on death's door such a short time ago could possess such relentless energy. If I hadn't nursed him through the worst of it myself, I'd never have guessed how intense, how thorough, how devastatingly attentive he could be. By noon the next day I was deliciously sore and utterly content. He was gently massaging the small of my back when a frantic, impatient banging started on the front door. Alistair sighed, pressing a kiss to my shoulder before pulling on a shirt and going to answer it. From the bedroom I heard his voice, cool and polite. "Clara. Alaire is still asleep. Have a seat and wait a moment." I heard him leave, probably to give us privacy or to find some coffee. I was drifting back to sleep, wrapped in the scent of him, when the bedroom door burst open without a knock. Clara stood there, her face a mask of shock and fury. She'd cleaned up, but the red rashes still peeked out from the collar of her dress. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in my state of undress, my swollen lips, the bruises on my collarbone that his stubble had left behind. Her expression twisted into something ugly and envious. "Ilara," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "Julian is trash. I've already written to Aunt Beatrice. I've told her everything. I've changed my mind. I want to marry Alistair. And he agreed to it." The shamelessness of it took my breath away. I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I sat up, pulling the sheet around me, channeling every ounce of the icy composure I'd used in boardrooms. "Cousin," I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy, "I am so sorry for everything you've been through. But we are already legally married. It's a military marriage. Unless he asks for a divorce, I legally can't leave him even if I wanted to." She scoffed, stepping closer, her nose wrinkling. "The whole room smells sweet." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "I heard all about it. He's back to full health, isn't he? You're telling me someone in his condition could be cured with your so-called medical skills?" She took another step, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Don't tell me. You've been reborn too." I kept my face a cold, impassive mask. I wouldn't give her the confirmation. She gritted her teeth, stepping even closer. "So you knew. You knew all along that Julian was a scumbag. That's why you so generously handed him over to me, isn't it?" She was demanding answers, trying to piece together the wreckage of her plan. I gave her a look of pure contempt. "You want to know what Julian was like in our last life?" asked my voice low. Her eyes lit up with a desperate hope. "And in the future? Will he still be the same kind of man? Will he still become the richest man? Will I still be his glamorous wife, enjoying a life of endless wealth and glory?" The delusion was breathtaking. Even after living a second life, after being assaulted and abandoned, her only goal was the hollow, gilded cage I had escaped. "That means it should be me," she insisted, her voice rising hysterically. Just moments ago she'd wanted Alistair. Now she was back to Julian. She was a snake eating its own tail. I frowned in disgust, pulling the blanket higher. "I'm not feeling well," I muttered, trying to shut her down. She immediately switched tactics, trying to act pitiful. "I'm not feeling well either," she whined, her tone reverting to its old, irritating familiarity. "Can you take a look? Prescribe something for me." As if I were her personal physician obligated to serve. There was no force on earth that would make me treat her. But a cruel idea took shape. I offered a half-hearted warning. "You'd better get yourself to the hospital for a full examination. Skin conditions and other infectious diseases can get out of hand if left untreated." She snapped, her temper flaring. "Hey, aren't you known for your compassion as a doctor? If you won't help me and I go to the hospital and they find out it's some kind of dirty disease, people will talk. I'll be humiliated. How will I ever compete with you for Alistair then?" This was the moment I truly saw it. In both lives, Clara had absolutely no shame. No bottom. She would drag everyone down into the mud with her. "Alistair and I are already married," I said calmly. "If you think you can steal him, go ahead. Try all you want." Just as I finished, Alistair returned. He'd heard everything. His face was a storm cloud. "Clara," he said, his voice cold and final. "Leave. Now." She shrunk under his glare and scurried out. He locked the door behind her and turned to me, his expression crumbling into something oddly vulnerable. He sat on the edge of the bed looking utterly pitiful. "We just got married," he said, his voice soft. And you're already trying to give me away? I laughed, the tension breaking. I reached out and pinched his cheek. You look like a sad little puppy right now. My very own puppy. He caught my hand, kissing my palm. I don't want to be given away. Despite my better judgment, and purely to see the look on her face when she received the diagnosis from a stranger, I eventually agreed to take Clara to the military hospital for her examination. The moment we walked into the clinic lobby, my blood ran cold. There he was. Julian Croft. He looked different. The time in the countryside had roughened him. He was tanner, leaner, his city softness sanded away by hard labor. But the moment he saw me, his eyes lit up with the same old fake enthusiasm. The opportunist had returned. "Elara," he said, his voice sickeningly sweet. "By destiny." Clara didn't care about appearances anymore. The moment she laid eyes on him, all her delusions of grandeur vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated rage. She stormed forward and slapped him hard across the face. "You bastard," she screamed, her voice echoing through the lobby. "Because of you, I was locked in a cattle pen for days. Just wait till I get back to the city. I'll have my aunt destroy you." Julian wasn't one to back down. His own carefully constructed charm evaporated. He slapped her right back, the sound like a gunshot. "I already made it clear that I rejected you. You were the one who used your money to bribe those lowlifes to go after the village girl. That's why you were locked up. If I were you, I'd leave before something worse happens." Enraged, Clara lunged at him, punching and kicking wildly. At first, Julian just tried to block her blows, but soon he fought back, and the two of them started brawling like common street fighters right there in the sterile clinic lobby. Nurses gasped. Patients stared. And then the final act. The village beauty, Penelope, returned from the pharmacy, her arms full of supplies. She took in the scene, Clara screaming and clawing at her Julian, and flew into a primal rage. With a shriek, she rushed forward, grabbed Clara's hair and yanked hard. "You city witch! Leave him alone," she screamed. Clara screamed back, a sound of pure agony, and called out to me for help. "Elara. Cousin. Help me." I stood there, arms crossed, watching the beautiful, brutal spectacle unfold. This was the man Clara had chosen over Alistair. This was the life she had coveted. I felt nothing but a cold, distant disgust. A crowd had gathered, gawking at the unbelievable scene. It wasn't until Penelope, with a furious wrench, tore a patch of Clara's scalp clean away, hair and skin, that Clara dropped to her knees, sobbing, her eyes bloodshot with pain and humiliation. "Mercy. Please," she begged. That's when I moved. Not to help her but to end the circus. In my capacity as head of clinical training, I ordered the security guards to throw all three of them out of the hospital. They were pulled apart, still spitting venomous insults at each other. Julian didn't spare either woman a glance. As the guards hustled them toward the doors, he turned to me, smoothing his hair, a grin plastered on his face as if nothing had happened. "Elara," he said warmly. "Are you hungry? Let's go to the Yunjiang restaurant. My treat." I looked at him as if he were something I'd scraped off my shoe. "Who are you?" I replied icily. "I don't know you." I didn't even look at him. The elegant, pampered man I'd created in my previous life was gone, revealing the coarse, desperate striver beneath. "Elara, it's me, Mason," he insisted, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "Don't you remember? I'm your destiny. I'm going to be the richest man in the country. You'll be the admired wife of a tycoon." A jolt of alarm surged through me. "I'm going to be the richest man." He said it with a certainty that spoke of knowledge, not ambition. He knew. He had been reborn. He kept smiling, walking closer, trying to touch me. I immediately stepped back, repulsed. Yet he still tried. "Elara, we had a wonderful life together in our last life. Believe me, this time I'll love you, spoil you, cherish you, and protect you just the same." If I hadn't been reborn myself, I might have been fooled by the false tenderness. But I let out a light, dismissive laugh. "Julian, don't talk nonsense. Our families arranged for an alliance with the Vances. You tried to snatch the match from me, but he didn't want you. So now I'm the one marrying into the Vance family." His grin finally faltered. "You mean you're really going to marry Alistair Vance? That sickly, short-lived guy?" He sneered, the mask slipping completely to reveal the ugliness beneath. "I'm telling you, he doesn't have many days left. And Clara has a thing for stealing whatever you want, so watch your back." That's my business, not yours, I replied coolly. He clearly hadn't expected me to be colder to him than I was in our previous life. Utterly indifferent. Condescending. Suddenly, the familiar sound of a Beijing 212 Jeep rumbled to a halt outside. The passenger door opened and Luke stepped out. He was in full dress uniform, every ribbon and medal perfectly placed, his boots polished to a mirror shine. He radiated strength, authority, and vibrant health. My heart started pounding, my face flushing with heat and pride. This was my husband. Julian didn't notice him at first. His eyes were glued to the car, nearly drooling. I'd given him a similar Jeep as a wedding gift in our past life, only to later discover he'd used it to chauffeur his mistresses. I stepped forward and stood next to Alistair, slipping my hand into the crook of his arm. Then I looked Julian straight in the eye. "Julian," I said, my voice clear and carrying. "Let me be honest with you. The moment I met Alistair Vance, I fell in love with him." Only then did Julian finally notice Alistair. Tall, powerful, healthy, and strikingly handsome. Nothing like the doomed man he'd imagined. Julian's smile faded instantly, his expression turning sour with disbelief and bitter envy. Alistair wrapped his arm around me protectively. "Nice to meet you," he said, his voice a low, confident rumble. "I'm Alistair Vance. Alara's husband." Julian froze, his eyes wide behind his glasses. You're not dead." Alistair chuckled, a rich, warm sound. "Thanks to my wife's exceptional medical skills, I came back from death's door." He didn't bother with anger toward Julian. He was too pleased, too possessive. He tightened his arm around me, pulling me closer, and whispered in my ear, "I love you too, Alara." Then, in full view of a gobsmacked Julian, he gently nibbled on my earlobe. A blatant, possessive claim. Julian's face turned black with rage. His fists clenched at his sides. Just then, a voice shouted from across the street. Penelope, her face tear-streaked, was running toward us. "Julian, my dad's dying. You promised you'd marry me and take me to the city. Come now, tell him yourself." Julian instantly stepped back as if trying to escape. "Penelope, I can't marry you. I'm leaving soon. Just give up already." Penelope grabbed his ear, yanking him down to her level. "So, those city girls were right. You really are a two-faced jerk." Alistair and I stood there, watching as she dragged a sputtering, humiliated Julian away by the ear. It was a fittingly farcical end to the scene. A few moments later, Clara emerged from the exam room, her face ashen. She was crying, but this time it was real, gut-wrenching sobs of horror. "I can't believe it," she wailed, not caring who heard. "I have syphilis. Damn that Pengju village. I swear I'll burn the whole place down." She turned and saw me and Alistair standing together. Her expression shifted to one of utter shame. She forced a pathetic smile. "The doctor said it's curable. Once I'm treated, I'll be as good as new. No different from a virgin." Alistair and I instinctively, simultaneously took a large step back. He, ever the decent man, still arranged for her to be sent back to the guest house. He even bought her a train ticket back to the capital, a kindness she absolutely did not deserve. But Clara, ever the parasite, refused to leave. She wanted to stay. She still thought she could salvage something from the wreckage. We didn't bother with her. We had our own life to build. The poison she had tried to spread had splashed back on her, and the well of her future was forever contaminated. The telegram arrived the next morning, a crisp, officious slip of paper that felt like a cold hand from the past reaching into our warm new world. Private Evans delivered it, his expression carefully neutral. It was from my mother. My fingers were oddly clumsy as I unfolded it. A part of me, a foolish, childish part one thought I'd buried decades ago, hoped for something. Concern perhaps. Congratulations, even if belated. The reality was a slap. The message was brief, cold, and utterly insane. It instructed me, her daughter, to immediately divorce my new husband, a decorated military officer from a powerful family, so that my syphilitic, disgraced cousin could marry him instead. So much for maternal love. The thought was a cold stone in my gut. My brother Neil was undoubtedly behind this, ensuring the family's favor and assets remained undiluted by my connection to the Vances. My mother, as always, was his eager instrument. I had no intention of responding. The paper felt filthy in my hands. But Alistair took it from me, his jaw tight. He read it, his face darkening with a protective fury that made my heart ache. "No," he said, his voice a low growl. He went to the small communications office right then and there. I didn't follow, but I could imagine him, spine rigid, dictating a reply in that clear, commanding tone. He returned a short while later, his expression grim but satisfied. "It's done," he said, pulling me into his arms. He promised the telegram would state clearly that he had already married me, that the matter was closed. Not only that, but he'd also sent a separate message to his own family, telling them to start preparing for a proper wedding ceremony back in the capital. He held me tightly, his hand stroking my hair with a tenderness that undid me. "Elle, are you all right? Are you feeling unwell?" His concern was so genuine, so at odds with the calculated cruelty of my own blood. I patted his back softly, leaning into his strength. "I'm fine," I whispered into his chest. He pulled back slightly, cupping my face. His eyes searched mine, seeing the hurt I tried to hide. I feel heartbroken for you. I can't believe your own mother would treat you like that." His empathy was my undoing. A single, traitorous tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. He brushed it away with his thumb. "What does it matter?" I said, forcing a quiet smile. "I have you now." He said he wanted to take me somewhere that evening, a surprise. He was boyishly excited, the earlier anger forgotten. He bundled me into the Jeep and drove us to a part of the base I hadn't seen before, a recreational hall usually used for briefings. When he opened the doors, I gasped. The hall was transformed. Strings of soft lights glowed overhead, casting a warm, magical glow. Simple decorations, paper lanterns, streamers, adorned the walls. And in the center of the room stood a crowd of people. All his fellow officers, their wives, the medical staff from the infirmary, even Dr. Evans, all beaming at us. And then Alistair turned to me. He got down on one knee right there in front of everyone. My hands flew to my mouth. He pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple, beautiful gold band. "Elara Sterling," he said, his voice solemn and clear, echoing in the hushed room. "I was afraid of losing you. I didn't want to wait and risk missing the chance, so I filed the marriage application first. But I know every woman dreams of a real proposal and a fairy tale wedding. I want to give you all of that." Tears were streaming down my face now, happy ones. This tough, practical, ice-faced war king was kneeling in front of his entire world, giving me the romance I never knew I wanted. So where's that legendary cold-faced war god now? I managed to tease through my tears, holding out my trembling hand. "Hurry up and put the ring on." He laughed, a sound of pure joy, and jumped up to slide the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. He lifted me into the air, spinning me around as everyone erupted into cheers and applause. "Kiss her. Kiss her," they chanted. He cupped my face gently and kissed me, not just once but over and over, reluctant to stop as our friends whistled and clapped. And that's when I saw him. Over Alistair's shoulder, through the crowd, a ghost at the feast. Julian. He was standing in the shadows near the door, his face a contorted mask of disbelief and rage. Didn't he say he was going back to the capital? What was he still doing here? The sight of him was a splash of cold water. But Alistair's arms were around me, his ring was on my finger, and our friends were celebrating us. I pushed the sight of Julian from my mind and lost myself in the joy of the moment. The joy was compounded soon after. Because of the training materials and protocols I had written, which Dr. Evans had submitted to the Capital Medical University, I received an official letter. They were impressed. Deeply impressed. They were offering me a position as a visiting professor and a lead research role at their affiliated hospital. Coincidentally, we were already planning to return to the capital for our wedding ceremony. And Alistair had more news. The critical intelligence he'd secured before his injury had been instrumental in a major operation. He was being summoned home to be honored with a military commendation and a promotion. Everything was unfolding perfectly. The web of my past life was unraveling, and a new, glorious tapestry was being woven. The journey back to the capital was a world away from the dusty, hopeless train ride out. We were all smiles, our hands intertwined. Alistair couldn't stop looking at the ring on my finger, a quiet, proud smile playing on his lips. When we arrived, he went straight to the military headquarters to receive his award. I went home alone. I only wanted to see my grandfather. No one else mattered. The Sterling mansion felt like a museum of my childhood neglect. It was opulent, cold, and silent. I went straight to my grandfather's wing, but before I could reach it, a voice stopped me. Well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. Clara was there, already entrenched, clinging to my mother's arm with exaggerated affection. She looked down her nose at me, her smile a vicious sneer. She had clearly gotten here first and spun her web of lies. "Ilara," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I've got Aunt Beatrice backing me now. She's going to talk to Grandpa and convince him to make you divorce Alistair. His injury has left him incapable. It's the merciful thing to do." I didn't want to engage. My mother's inability to judge people had always left me cold. She looked at me with a blank, placid expression, already convinced by Clara's performance. Casually, as if mentioning the weather, I brought up what had happened in Pongju village. My mother's face tightened with disbelief. "Don't be ridiculous, Ilara. Clara has been through a terrible ordeal, but she's a good girl. She wouldn't get involved in such sordid things." Clara shot me a look of pure triumph. So I played my card. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folded medical report from the clinic. I didn't hand it to Clara. I handed it to my mother. "The doctors there were very thorough," I said mildly. My mother unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the official heading, the clinical language, and then landed on the one word that could cut through all her delusions: syphilis. She recoiled as if the paper were on fire. She yanked her arm away from Clara so violently that Clara stumbled. "You little monster," she shrieked, her voice trembling with horror. "You had syphilis and never said a word. You did laundry here with the rest of us. You shared the bathroom. What were you trying to do? Kill us all?" Clara's face went white. "Oh, come on, Aunt Beatrice. It's just syphilis. It's not some terminal disease. I've already taken the meds. It's all cleared up." She was trying to brush it off, speaking with a forced, calming tone. It was the wrong thing to say. My mother, her face purpling with rage, drew back her hand and smacked Clara across the face with a crack that echoed in the hall. "I've had enough. I'm going to talk to Dad." She stormed off toward my grandfather's rooms. Clara stood there, clutching her cheek, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. The golden child had finally tarnished beyond repair. I didn't follow. I went to my grandfather. He was propped up in bed, frail and ill, but his eyes were clear, reading a medical text. They lit up the moment he saw me. "Ilara, my girl, you're home." We had barely begun to talk, me telling him about Alistair's recovery, when chaos erupted outside. My mother's voice, shrill and furious, echoed through the house. She was ordering the staff to strip and wash all the bedding and clothing in the house. She demanded Clara be moved out immediately. Clara, who had always acted like a tyrant because of my mother's favoritism, had lost her protector. She came crying to me, her last resort. "Cousin," she sobbed, genuine tears of panic now. "You're a doctor. Please tell Aunt Beatrice it's not a big deal. I'm not really sick." My mother stormed after her, her face a thundercloud. "You have syphilis. That's a sexually transmitted disease. A dirty, contagious disease. And you brought it into our house. How could you disgrace the Sterling family like this?" At that moment, my father, David Sterling, and my younger brother Neil returned from the office. Hearing the shouting, his voice boomed through the foyer. "What is the meaning of this racket?" My mother trembled. "David, it's she's." But it was too late. He had heard everything. Our family shame was now on full display. His face, usually a mask of cold calculation, flushed with anger. "Our family shame should be kept behind closed doors," he snapped, his eyes flashing at my mother. "Beatrice, how could you go shouting about this kind of filth in front of everyone? Are you trying to destroy our family's reputation?" It wasn't that he was defending Clara. He wasn't. He was a patriarchal man who didn't like her much either. He cared about appearances, not people. In the end, Clara was kicked out of the house with nothing but the clothes on her back. My mother, so furious she was shaking, didn't even give her a penny for a hotel. Later, someone else came to the house. I thought it might be Alistair and my heart leapt, but the butler's announcement made my blood run cold. "Mr. Julian Croft to see you, sir." Since returning to the city, he'd scrubbed up. He looked more refined, scholarly, even in a new suit. But the moment he walked into the drawing room and saw me, the mask slipped. He got straight to the point with my father, his voice oozing false sincerity. He claimed he had always loved me deeply, that he hadn't expected someone else to snatch me away. He insisted Alistair was doomed to die and would never bring me happiness. Then he tried to persuade my parents to make me divorce Alistair and marry him instead. The Croft family wasn't prestigious, but they held a piece of a business deal my father had been eyeing. On top of that, Julian's father had married my dad's first love. And just like that, my father decided to use me to settle an old personal grudge. He shamelessly agreed to Julian's request. "I'll talk to her," he told Julian, as if I were a horse to be traded. My mother, of course, backed him completely. "She's already married," I said sharply, my patience evaporating. "Are you really trying to destroy a military marriage?" My father, who had never cared about me, finally spoke to me directly. "Elara, we're only thinking of your happiness." "Yeah," my mother chimed in, parroting Clara's lies. "What good is a man who's dying? I heard he was badly injured and can't even perform physically. He'll never give you a happy life." The vulgarity of it, coming from my own mother, stunned me into silence. When I wouldn't budge, she tried again. She always sided with my father. Since he didn't like me, neither did she. Calmly, I looked at my mother. I had held this card for a lifetime. It was time to play it. "Do you know why Dad really wants me to marry Julian?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Because Julian's mother is Dad's first love. He still keeps her old love letters and photos in a locked drawer in his study. Every year on the anniversary of their first meeting, he shuts himself in there alone and won't let anyone bother him." The color drained from my mother's face. This was the one ghost that had always haunted her marriage. My father's face went purple with rage and humiliation. "You lying little." But my mother, meek, placid Beatrice, finally snapped. She slapped my father across the face. The sound was like a gunshot. "So you're still in love with Anne Croft?" she screamed, decades of resentment pouring out. "Is that why you named your son Neil? Because you're still thinking of her every single day." My father, who cared deeply about his public image, tried to soothe her, but things only spun further out of control when Julian's parents suddenly arrived, arms full of fancy gifts, hoping to cement the deal. The situation became a screaming, chaotic farce. Eventually, the Croft family was asked to leave. My parents kept fighting, loud, relentless, and bitter. Later, my mother came to find me in my old room, her eyes swollen from crying. She was probably hoping for comfort, for an ally. She gave me a pitiful apology. "For the past 20 years, your father only cared about your brother, and that's why I didn't treat you well either." I looked at her. We were strangers. There was no warmth, no bond. I felt nothing. I didn't even care to hear her excuses. After dinner, I sat by my grandfather's bedside. He was weaker, but his grip on my hand was firm. "Elara," he whispered. "When I'm gone, there will be no one left to protect you. You have to be strong. You must be happy." Tears welled in my eyes. "Grandpa Alistair and I are already married. I will be happy. He's being honored today. He'll be back soon to see you. You'll like him." He smiled gently, stroking my hair. Then he told me stories about how he'd once met Alistair's grandfather, a man of great spirit and promise. "I believe his grandson is also someone you can entrust your future to," he said, his voice fading with fatigue. By the time Alistair returned, night had fallen. He stepped into the soft light of my grandfather's room and I caught my breath. The 3 stars on his shoulder had become 4. He'd been promoted. My parents were nowhere to be found. Still sulking, no doubt. I took Alistair to see Grandpa. The moment the old man saw him, his face lit up with joy. He held both our hands and told Alistair to take good care of me. Alistair wrapped his arm around me and promised him, "Sir, for the rest of my life, I'll love only her." It was a vow made in the quiet of a sick room, and it meant more to me than any grand ceremony. The web of the past was in tatters. My new future was finally beginning. The next day, Alistair came to the Sterling mansion officially to propose. It was a formality, a pageant for the sake of tradition, but one he insisted on doing right. He arrived in his full dress uniform, the 4 stars on his shoulder gleaming, his posture ramrod straight. He looked every inch the war hero and scion of a powerful dynasty. My father, still fuming from the previous day's revelations, stayed at his office and refused to come home. My mother, nursing her wounded pride and heart, had gone out on a protracted shopping trip, a feeble act of defiance. The house felt empty, echoing with the ghosts of their failed marriage. It was my grandfather who received him. He had insisted on being helped from his bed and into a chair in the grand drawing room, a blanket over his knees. His hands trembled, but his eyes were sharp and clear. Alistair's parents and his own formidable grandfather arrived shortly after, a delegation of vast strength and stability that seemed to push back the shadows in the room. The two old men, my grandfather and Alistair's, looked at each other and broke into wide, knowing smiles. They had known each other in their youth, and the stories began to flow effortlessly, tales of their own military service, of business deals struck with a handshake, of a time when honor wasn't just a word. They spoke of us, of Alistair and me, not as assets in an alliance, but as the promising future of their legacies. Since we were already legally married, the engagement ceremony was a beautiful, respectful formality. Tea was served. Promises were made. It was everything a young girl might dream of, and it was happening in the wreckage of my family, presided over by the only person in it who had ever truly loved me. And then the front door slammed open. My father had returned. He stood in the doorway of the drawing room, his face a thunderous mask of rage. He took in the scene, the two patriarchs deep in conversation, Alistair by my side, the easy camaraderie, and his fury found its target. He stormed in, ignoring the Vancess completely, and pointed a shaking finger at my grandfather. "You," he spat. "You meddling old fool. You're supposed to be on your deathbed, not orchestrating weddings and meddling in affairs you no longer understand." The room went dead silent. The air crackled with tension. My grandfather didn't flinch. He looked at his son, and for the first time I saw not love but a deep, weary disappointment. "I understand that this family needs strength and loyalty," he said, his voice thin but steady. "I understand that better than you ever have, David." Enraged by the public rebuke, my father sneered. "Straith, you're handing it over to a daughter who will just marry out and take it with her. Everything should go to Neil. He is the future of this family." That's when my grandfather lost his temper. A fire I hadn't seen in years lit in his eyes. He drew himself up in his chair. "Is that so? Then perhaps we should ensure the future is in capable hands." He turned to his lawyer, who had been hovering discreetly in the corner for precisely this moment. "Effective immediately, I am transferring 20% of my company shares to Alara." The words hung in the air. My father's mouth dropped open. 20%. It was the same number of shares my brother Neil held. It made us equal heirs. "You can't do that," my father spluttered, his face mottled with purple rage. "It is done," my grandfather said, his voice final. He was the largest shareholder. His word was law. My father, who had always assumed Neil would be the uncontested heir, was stunned into apoplectic silence. He turned his furious gaze on my mother, who had just slipped into the room, her arms laden with shopping bags. "Beatrice, your shares. You will sign them over to Neil. Now." But my mother, still raw and bitter from the previous day's humiliation, found a spine she never knew she had. She looked my father dead in the eye, her voice cold. "I already transferred my shares to Alara. Last week." The silence this time was absolute. My father looked like he'd been shot. With my grandfather's shares and my mother's, I now held the controlling interest. The entire family enterprise rested in my hands. I was the majority shareholder of Sterling Holdings. I had not just married into power. I had seized it. The news, of course, reached the Croft family instantly. Their reaction was one of pure, unadulterated panic. I heard the details later from a gleeful household maid who'd been eavesdropping on a furious phone call. Mr. Croft, in a rage, had struck Julian across the face. "I told you again and again to marry Alara Sterling as soon as you returned. And what did you do? You stayed in that damn village chasing skirts. Now she's married someone else and we've lost our best chance at a business alliance. We're finished." As he was yelling, a new figure arrived at the Croft doorstep. It was Penelope, the village girl from Pongju. She was showing, her simple dress stretched tight over a rounded belly. She announced, loud and clear for the whole street to hear, that she was carrying Julian's child and demanded an official place in the family. Mr. and Mrs. Croft were so shocked by the double blow, the loss of my fortune and the arrival of a pregnant peasant, that they both fainted on the spot and had to be hospitalized. Penelope was Julian's first love, his comfort during his exile. He tried to calm her, to make promises. "Once I become the richest man in the country, I'll give you and the baby a good life," he pleaded, falling back on the empty mantra of a future that had always depended on me. But without me, how could he ever become wealthy? The Mason family was on the verge of bankruptcy. Their funding had dried up. It was only because I had begged my grandfather to give me his personal savings in my past life that I'd been able to bail them out and fund Julian's first crucial business ventures. Julian had been reborn. He remembered all of this. But instead of trying to save his family on his own, his first instinct was to come crawling back to me, the lifeline he thought he owned. Just before my wedding, he rushed over to the mansion in a panic, his face pale, his eyes wild. He found me in the garden, overseeing the arrangements for the next day's ceremony. "Ilara," he pleaded, grabbing my arm. I wrenched it away. "Don't go through with the wedding. File for divorce. I don't care that you've been married. I'll still marry you. I'll forgive everything." I looked at him the way one looks at a cockroach scuttling across a pristine floor. The delusion was breathtaking. "Julian," I said, my voice cold and flat. "Do you really think I'll take my grandfather's savings like I did last time? Just to save your failing company and raise your endless parade of illegitimate children?" I took a step closer, watching the dawning horror in his eyes. "You've lived 2 lives and you're still this delusional?" He slumped against a stone planter, the realization finally crashing down on him. You're reborn too," he murmured, his voice hollow. "That explains it. That explains why Alistair Vance isn't paralyzed. Why he's healthy and already married to you." He left, defeated, a broken man watching his stolen future crumble to dust. I felt a flicker of pity, so small it was gone in an instant. He had made his choices in both lifetimes. I didn't expect what he would do next. Desperation makes men dangerous. The day of my wedding dawned bright and clear. It was to be a grand affair, a merging of 2 powerful families. My parents, now terrified of my financial power, scrambled to cozy up to me like desperate leeches. They didn't dare cause trouble and even followed my grandfather's orders to prepare a respectable dowry, trying to buy back a sliver of my favor. My brother Neil was visibly upset, his inheritance halved before his eyes. My father dragged him into a corner and gave him a harsh, whispered lecture I was glad I couldn't hear. I was in my old room, surrounded by maids helping me into my exquisite white gown. It was a masterpiece of lace and silk, a far cry from the simple registry office of the countryside. I looked in the mirror and for the first time I didn't see the rejected daughter or the used wife. I saw Ilara Vance. Wife. Power. A maid brought me a glass of champagne for my nerves. I took a sip, feeling the bubbles calm me. But within minutes, a wave of dizziness hit me. The room began to swim. The faces of the maids blurred. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the face of the maid who had given me the champagne. She wasn't one of ours. I woke up with a throbbing headache, tied to a hard wooden chair in a cold, damp, abandoned warehouse. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light cutting through the broken windows. The smell of mildew and oil filled my lungs. Footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Julian emerged from the shadows, his eyes crazed, his hair disheveled. He'd shed his city suit for rough clothes. He looked like what he was, a cornered animal. "You're awake," he said, his voice unervingly calm. He walked over and touched my face. I recoiled, but I was bound too tightly. "You never let me touch you in our last life," he mused, his fingers tracing my jawline. "I kept going through woman after woman, but you never once looked at me. Do you know how angry that made me?" His touch was vile. I spat in his face. He flinched back, then laughed, a manic, unhinged sound. He licked the spit from his cheek. "And now in this life you treat me like trash again. I'll make sure you submit to me even if I have to break you. If you dare touch me," I warned through gritted teeth, my voice shaking with a fear I couldn't suppress, "you won't live to regret it." He really had gone insane. The loss of his sure thing, the unraveling of his plans, had shattered him. He grabbed my jaw roughly, his fingers digging in. "I think I will," he whispered, his breath hot on my face. He was about to kiss me, to claim what he thought was his property, when a gunshot rang out. The sound was deafening in the empty space. Julian screamed, collapsing to his knees in front of me, clutching his leg. Blood bloomed through his trousers. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light, was Alistair. He held a service pistol, steady and aimed. His face was a terrifying mask of cold fury. What he had attempted was more than assault. In this era, It was hooliganism of the most serious kind, especially against the wife of a high-ranking officer. It was a capital offense. "Elara," Alistair said, his voice low and tight with controlled rage. He was at my side in an instant, his hands gentle as he frantically untied the ropes. "I'm so sorry I was late." He picked me up in his arms, cradling me like something precious. I clung to him, burying my face in his neck, the scent of his uniform and his skin washing away the stench of the warehouse. I hadn't been as calm as I pretended. Deep down, I'd been terrified that my entire life, in both past and present, would be ruined by the same pathetic scum. "I'll protect you from now on," he whispered into my hair, his voice resolute. "I swear it." The fear and adrenaline were receding, leaving a strange, profound calm in their wake. I reached down and gently placed a hand on my stomach. I had suspected for a few days, but now I knew with certainty. "And our baby," I added softly. He froze. He looked down at me, his eyes wide, the fury replaced by stunned wonder. You're pregnant?" I nodded, tears of relief and joy finally spilling over. Most likely since the night we registered our marriage. The sound that escaped him was half sob, half laugh. He held me tighter, burying his face in my hair. He was so excited he couldn't stop smiling the entire drive home, his gun resting on the seat beside us, his free hand never letting go of mine. The wedding was delayed by a few hours, but it proceeded. My grandfather presided, beaming with pride. My parents smiled brittle, fearful smiles. Julian's attempted crime was kept quiet for the sake of family honor. His family's honor, which was now in tatters. He would face a military tribunal and his fate was sealed. As I walked down the aisle on my grandfather's arm toward Alistair, who stood proud and fierce in his uniform, I saw none of them. I only saw him. I saw the future. I had my crown. And the cage of my past was finally, irrevocably locked shut. The grand wedding felt like a dream painted over a nightmare. The flowers were white and fragrant, the champagne flowed like a river of diamonds, and the guests were a who's who of the capital's elite. I moved through it all on Alistair's arm, a serene smile plastered on my face, my hand resting on the subtle, terrifyingly wonderful swell of my stomach. Inside, I was still trembling from the cold concrete of the warehouse, the ghost of Julian's touch like a stain on my skin. But Alistair was my anchor. His hand on the small of my back was a constant, steadying pressure. Every time his thumb stroked absent-mindedly over the silk of my dress, the tremors inside me stilled. He played the part of the proud, doting husband perfectly, but his eyes, when they met mine, held a dark, protective fury that promised retribution. The ice-faced king of hell had returned, but this time his fire was for me. My parents were obsequious, their smiles strained. They hovered near us, trying to bask in the reflected glory of the Vancess, but they were ghosts at their own feast. Their power was mine now. The deed to the controlling shares of Sterling Holdings sat in my grandfather's safe, a weapon more potent than any wedding vow. Neil, my brother, was a storm cloud in a tailored suit. He avoided me, drinking too much and shooting me looks of pure, unvarnished hatred. The golden boy had been dethroned, and he didn't know how to exist in the shade. The only moment of true, unadulterated joy was my dance with my grandfather. We'd had a special chair brought for him, and he'd insisted on standing, his frail body leaning heavily on mine as we swayed for a few precious seconds. "You did it, my girl," he whispered, his voice a faint rustle. "You took your future. Now build it." His eyes, clouded with illness but sharp with love, found Alistair over my shoulder. "And you chose well. He has a strong foundation. Don't let anyone, especially your fool of a father, undermine it." "I won't, Grandpa," I promised, my throat tight. He patted my hand. "Good. Now let an old man rest. Go to your husband." The wedding night was spent in the Vance family's palatial city home, not the sterile mansion of my childhood. Alistair carried me over the threshold, his strength effortless, and we left the world of performative joy and hidden daggers behind. That night there was no fear, no past. There was only us and the profound, quiet wonder of the life we had created together. The next morning I began. I sat down at the vast mahogany desk in the study that had been designated as mine. Before me were the ledgers of Sterling Holdings. My father, in a fit of pique, had had them delivered, a silent challenge. "Let's see the little girl run an empire." I opened the first ledger. The numbers swam, but not for long. The mind that had built Julian's fortune from nothing clicked into gear. I saw the waste, the timid investments, the cronyism that had kept the company stagnant for a decade. My father was a custodian, not a builder. He maintained what my grandfather had built, too afraid to innovate, too greedy to share power. I picked up the phone, my first call not to a board member, but to the head of my grandfather's private research foundation. Dr. Evans? I said, the name of the infirmary doctor coming automatically. I corrected myself. Dr. Renford. It's Alara Vance. I am allocating $5 million initially to the pharmaceutical research division. I want a dedicated team on regenerative medicine and targeted cancer therapies. Report directly to me. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Mrs. Vance, that's nearly our entire R&D budget for the year. Then it seems we were not budgeting enough, I said calmly. The future of this company is not in steel and shipping, doctor. It is in life. Make it happen. I hung up. The deed was done. In my past life, I had failed to develop the drugs that could have extended my grandfather's life. This time I would not fail. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings and quiet, ruthless decisions. I sat in boardrooms where old men looked at me with a mixture of condescension and fear. I spoke little, but when I did, my words were precise, my knowledge of markets and medicine unnerving. I reallocated funds, shut down dead-end projects, and promoted young, hungry executives who looked at me not as a Sterling but as Vance. As their leader. Alistair, meanwhile, was settling into his new role at military headquarters, his promotion granting him significant influence. Our lives became a tapestry of mutual support. He'd come home, shed his uniform, and listen as I talked about boardroom coups and research breakthroughs. I'd listen as he talked about tactical deployments and geopolitical tensions. We were partners in every sense of the word. One evening he came home with a particular gleam in his eye. "I have a surprise for you," he said, leading me outside. Parked in the driveway was a car. But not just any car. It was a sleek, beautiful British racing green convertible, a model so new and exclusive it wasn't even on the market yet. "It's armored," he said a little proudly. "Bulletproof glass, reinforced chassis. And it's fast. So you're safe, but you're not slow." He tossed me the keys. A wedding present. For the woman who has everything except a suitable mode of transportation for a titan of industry. I laughed, throwing my arms around him. It was extravagant, ridiculous, and perfect. It was a symbol of the life he was building for me. One of safety but also of thrilling speed and independence. The only shadow was the impending trial of Julian. Alistair kept the details from me, but I knew it was happening. The military justice system was swift and severe. The charge of attempted assault against the wife of a decorated colonel, compounded with kidnapping, was a guaranteed life sentence, if not worse. I felt no satisfaction, only a distant, cold sense of closure. One afternoon a messenger arrived with a letter. It was from Clara. The handwriting was spidery and desperate. "Clara, they're sending me away. To a sanatorium in the mountains. Mother says it's for my health, but it's a prison. They think I'm mad. Julian's family is ruined. His father had a stroke from the shame. His mother blames me. Please. You're the only one who understands. Help me. Your cousin Claire." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and dropped it into the fire. I watched the edges blacken and curl, the plea turning to ash. I understood all right. I understood that some poisons need to be quarantined. I felt no guilt. She had chosen her path, step by selfish step. My revenge was not her suffering. My revenge was my happiness. It was the life growing inside me. It was the respect in my husband's eyes. It was the power humming at my fingertips. I was in my 7th month when my grandfather took a turn for the worse. We moved him to the best suite in the hospital my company now primarily funded. I spent my days at his bedside, reading company reports to him, telling him about the promising early results from the cancer research team. He was fading, but he held on with a stubborn will. "I want to see my great-grandchild," he'd whisper, his papery hand gripping mine. One evening, as a late winter sun bled red over the city skyline, Alistair and I were with him. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft hiss of oxygen. My grandfather's eyes, which had been closed, fluttered open. They were clear, preternaturally so. He looked at Alistair, then at me, and finally at my rounded stomach. "A strong foundation," he rasped, repeating his wedding words to Alistair. You built it well. He looked at me, a final brilliant spark of love in his gaze. And you, my brilliant girl, you built the future on top of it. He smiled, a peaceful, contented smile. Then he closed his eyes and let out a long, soft sigh. The steady beep of the heart monitor flattened into a single, relentless tone. I didn't cry. I held his hand until it grew cold. I had given him the only gift I could, the certainty that his legacy was secure. The funeral was a state affair. My father gave a hollow, polished eulogy. I did not speak. My tribute was the silence I kept, the strength I showed. I was the rock now. I was the foundation. That night, as Alistair held me, my tears finally came. Not just for my grandfather, but for the lonely girl I had been, for the woman who had died unappreciated, for the dizzying, terrifying, wonderful second chance I had been given. He saw the baby, I whispered into Alistair's chest. In his way he knew. He knew, Alistair murmured, kissing my hair. He knew everything. 2 weeks later my son was born. He came into the world not with a cry, but with a determined, quiet grizzle. He had my father's dark hair and Alistair's piercing blue eyes. But he had my grandfather's name, Elias, after the man who had given me the tools to seize my destiny. Holding him, smelling his sweet, milky scent, I felt the last shattered pieces of my past life click into place. The dazzling, glamorous eyes from a capitalist family was gone. The betrayed wife was gone. The reborn avenger was gone. In their place was Alara Vance. Mother, wife, builder. I looked at Alistair, who was gazing at our son with a wonder that mirrored my own. He looked up and met my eyes, and in that shared look was a universe of understanding, of battle fought and won, of a future stretching out before us, bright and uncharted. The past was a closed book. The present was a gift. And the foundation for the future was at last perfectly, unshakably sound. The end.